Peter Ciotti for another episode of Fearless Media, where we get into the future of media, entertainment, and tech. And my guest today is Sam Engelbart from Galaxy Interactive. And Sam and I have known each other for quite some time, but we haven't seen each other for a while. But Sam, great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, Peter. I was trying to think the last time we were actually in the same room together. It's been a bunch of years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. But as I was telling you before, I've been following the things that you've been doing over at Galaxy. And first of all, just I've always found you to be a really interesting guy doing cool things, and a good guy too. And I love the fact that you're kind of blazing trails here in the world of Web3 and beyond. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about Web3, and I want to understand more about like what your focus is as a firm. But I also want to get into some of the issues that we don't talk about, I think, nearly enough, which is with everything moving so fast, what the impact is on Web3 technology in general on all of our lives, and kind of some of the lessons perhaps that we can take from that, and maybe just to keep ourselves sane through it all. But yeah. But anyhow, so Sam, first of all, welcome. Tell me a little bit more about what you do, and also the difference between Galaxy Interactive and Galaxy Digital. I know you're on the bleeding edge of all these kind of themes, but describe to me like how you started it and what it is and what your focus is.
Yeah, sure. So Galaxy Interactive is a venture franchise that my partner Richard Kim and I started inside of a publicly traded crypto and blockchain focused merchant bank called Galaxy Digital. Galaxy Digital is a firm started by Mike Novogratz and I and a couple other partners. We started the business in 2018 and took it public that same year. And then basically after the dust settled on that public transaction, I was originally running the overall venture business for Galaxy. And we had, amongst other things, we had raised a venture fund. The original founding team of Galaxy Digital was the team that was running Mike's family office. And I had moved from LA in 2016 and to New York. And then in 2017, started working with Mike and was running the sort of venture business in his family office. And then my partner, Chris, was running the sort of structured credit and later stage private equity. And our partner, Kim, was sort of running ops and doing other things inside of the family office that way. And we just, with a couple other partners, we had a trading partner, and that group of people ended up starting Galaxy Digital. And so Galaxy Interactive, it's a bit of a confusing story if you're not familiar with the overall team and the history of the business. But basically, that original venture fund that we had raised was going to be a generalist venture fund. And then when we had the public company, and all of a sudden we had a balance sheet on the public company, and we were trying to decide, well, okay, like what's going to be invested in from the balance sheet and what's going to be invested from the fund. And that was happening at the same time that Richard Kim had joined as our original founding COO for Galaxy Digital. He moved over from Goldman, where he was running the FX ops business for FX in trading in Goldman over in London. And so he moved over to New York, and he and I were just spending a ton of time talking. And in that first 6 months, 8 months together, we just bonded around this thesis of the idea that people are spending an increasing amount of their conscious time really inside of immersive digital worlds. And it was an interesting thing because, as you know, I come from the content world, and I had sort of done everything you could do in traditional media for the first half of my career, and then had been, moving more and more in the direction of first with digital media and then emerging tech, and started investing in video games and game studios around 2010, 2011, and crypto and blockchain. And, a few years after that, I guess, started buying Bitcoin in 2012. And so I sort of came at it from that approach. And Richard was from a completely different world. He was from finance and trading technologies and FX. And yet here we were together in New York in the early days of Galaxy Digital, and we were both convinced that there were going to be these amazing opportunities at the intersection of both of our worlds. So really, and that's what we do today. We think about interactive as really at that intersection of content and technology and social commerce. But really, a lot of this is is about people spending all their time in these immersive worlds, and the economies and the trading and everything you need to know, both to understand the content side, to understand digital worlds, and the trading to understand like what people are doing in them. So we started Galaxy Interactive, and we took that generalist fund and repurposed it as an interactive sector focused fund to find exactly like we'll talk about today, but really that intersection of content and tech and social commerce. And at the time we started, there, really were no large scaled venture funds dedicated to video games and interactive content and tech. There were a few smaller ones, and a couple of had kind of launched, and there were some guys in LA that were like raising a fund, and few others. But basically, we had a $325 million fund, and we just said, you know what? Solely by virtue of planting a flag right now around this space, we're instantly the biggest fund in the world focused on this idea. And so let's tell our story. Let's talk about what's interesting to us in this thesis that people are really migrating to these digital worlds. And that's what we did. So we started Galaxy Interactive. It's a division of Galaxy Digital focused entirely on venture investments at the intersection of content and infrastructure and social commerce.
Really interesting. And so within this, what is your day-to-day focus within Galaxy Interactive?
Yeah, so I'm one of the two GPs.
Yeah.
Richard and I are the co-GPs of the fund, and my day-to-day focus is everything from finding new companies to invest in. We have an amazing team that we've built over the last 3 years, so we spend a lot of time on that pipeline and looking for opportunities and meeting with companies. And we now have 100 companies in our portfolio. We fully invested that first fund, raised a second fund, same size again. So both the first and second fund were $325 million funds. And so we've been investing in the second fund and are now just about fully invested for new investments from the second fund, and we'll go out and raise the next one. But my job is kind of everything you would expect. It's from looking for opportunities and meeting with companies and talking with my team and with founders that my team meets and brings in to potentially invest in, and then talking with the founders and CEOs and team that are running the 100 portfolio companies that we've got. I'm an officer still of Galaxy Digital, so I spend a little bit of time just still in the broader Galaxy Digital ecosystem. And we're, the Galaxy Interactive is an important part of the asset management business of Galaxy Digital. And so we spend a lot of time strategically thinking about how to, continue to build that business as well.
I want to get into some of the terminology itself. And so when you look at what you do at Galaxy Interactive, do you consider that to be Web3, or do you define it differently from what your overall focus is? And then define to everybody out there just your feeling or your definition of what Web3 is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Web3 is a very, very important part of what I'm interested in and what we invest in and are thinking about. But it's a piece of a much bigger idea. So what we're interested in is what happens and what's investable when you believe, as we do, that the world is literally, like I described it earlier, like it is a migration to a digital frontier, right? I mean, like you got to think about us as we are becoming this increasingly digital species. And we're already, by the way, and you and I have talked about this in one form or another, I think, over the years, but we're already there. Like if I'm sure we'll get into the idea of the metaverse and talk about that and that term that gets thrown around so much now. But if what you're talking about when you say that is people spending most of their time in digital worlds, like, and doing their business and buying their stuff and hanging out with their friends, like we're already there. We're already spending the great majority, I would say more than 100% of our conscious time we're spending, immersed in our digital screens. Especially if you start thinking about second screens and third screens and so on, like we are in screens entirely already. But I think we're just really at the beginning of what those experiences are like, and we're gonna primarily interact digitally with our phones or via our phones for quite a while. But I think we're starting to move into more immersive forms of content experiences. I think we do a ton of investing in video games and game studios, and I always tell people when we have this conversation that, my entire team, and we love games, and my team are as knowledgeable and encyclopedic about games, and are as good at playing them probably as any team in the world could be, far better than me. But actually, it's not games that I'm primarily interested in. I think personally, I think they are, or at least not the thing I'm most interested in. I'm most interested in like what happens to us as a species when we're spending all this time in digital worlds, and games are really the tip of the spear. I always say it's the game engines and the technology that's being built to enable everything that happens inside of these game worlds, and the social interactions that happen in there, and the content that's being created by both in top down and bottom up. Like all of that is being driven by the games industry, but now it's just starting now, and it'll continue to spill out into all these other aspects of our lives.
Well, so I was going to take things a little bit of a different direction, but I'm going to go to where you were going. So what happens to us as a species when we spend more and more of our time in our digital worlds, which have overtaken our lives? And it's not like it's just happened. It's not that Web3 is, as you said, we're doing what we're doing right now. We spend our time in front of our screens. We're getting more immersed in it. People have been playing games for a long time. But how do you feel about that? I think that you're a father too, I believe, right?
No, well, I have a 14-year-old stepson. My
Okay.
fiance has a 14-year-old from her
Right.
first marriage. So
Okay.
I am a partial father.
Well, yes.
I
But
think close enough.
Yeah, you're close enough, and you are a thoughtful man. So what I heard you talking about this a little bit in another interview, but I'm curious to get your thoughts about, you're so close to all of this, and your head's thinking about all of this all the time. What does happen to us? I'll start at a very macro level. How do you feel about that as a species going forward, and what that means to our lives and the lives of those, in the next generation and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we could take this in a really philosophical direction and talk about the fact that I'm probably one of these weird people that thinks there's a decently high chance that we're in a simulation right now, and there's that's a whole other thing. But I think that one of the things, like assuming that we're really just talking about like what are we doing as in what feels like a move from physical to a digital world, I think
by the way, feel free to be philosophical. That's okay. I love it.
I mean, I look at how we're behaving, and the worlds that we're building for ourselves in these immersive sort of game engine rendered environments, and I just think it's like to me it feels obvious that if some intelligent life has been around for a long enough time, and I certainly believe that there's a lot other intelligent life in the universe, and it's been around a lot longer than the human species has been intelligent on the planet Earth. And so I just look at our behavior, and I think it screams of the idea that intelligent beings are going to continue to build and build more and more complicated things for ourselves. And you look at us now, and you look at these game worlds, and you look at the evolution even of just NPCs in games, not the non-player characters in games, and the AI that we're building for them, and the way that they're taking on their own lives and their own intelligent behavior. And I just think it's very hard not to zoom out from that and say, okay, so I don't know what we are or what's going on, but I've got to believe, like, I just look a few layers deeper even in where we are today, and you imagine what the worlds that we're building today are going to look like 100 years from now. And so you pull out in the other direction from that, and I feel like we're walking around in some sim game ourselves. But I think that nevertheless, we are here now, and we are whatever we may be, sort of metaphysically and ontologically, like we are here now, and we got to look at how our behavior is being affected by the increasingly digital nature of this current iteration. And I think there's some good and there's some bad. But I definitely think that the nature of digital, the fact that it's always on, the fact that it gives us the ability to reach and scale to the entire world all of the time, the fact that that the beautiful thing about this is people at a younger and younger age are being empowered to build things and do things and create things. And now, I mean, we'll come back again. We're going all over the place, but we'll come back to sort of Web3. But like the combination of digital and the ability of people to reach the world at scale instantly and create things that and share them with everybody. And then you add Web3, which largely is empowering those same people to monetize and to be entrepreneurial in ways that they never could have before. I mean, you look at some of the stats of like what's happening in terms of younger and younger kids and screen time, even amongst 4 or 5-year-olds, spending 2, 3, 4 hours a day in front of a screen and starting to build things. And like, you're going to see this whole generation, inside of Galaxy, we talk about this idea of a self-sovereign digital native. And that is the person in a lot of ways, like when I describe this journey we're on as an expedition to this digital frontier, it's like, that self-sovereign digital native, and that is the young person out there today that is born into digital, trained to create things digitally and share them and monetize their lives, and empowered by Web3 in a way that allows them to really bypass so many of the prior gatekeepers. The good of that is you're going to have people at younger and younger ages building businesses for themselves, building lives, being empowered. The bad is potentially we better be prepared for a pretty severe shock to a lot of things. The nation state as we previously understood it, the relationship between the government and people as we previously understood it, the relationship between parents and kids. Like we're not able to influence them or train them in the way that we used to, where you could reliably know what content was being put in front of your kid's face and what they were seeing. And even back in the days of television, I mean, for as long as there's been media, parents have stuck their kids in front of a television when they're busy and had them watch something. But it used to be that they're watching, relatively safe, and we can go talk about whether we think it's good or bad, but like some level of monitored and controlled interaction that we had a decent understanding and confidence was going to be, non-toxic. And now kids are, and by the way, that was in a broadcast model where it's being broadcast to the kid, but the kids aren't interacting with somebody on the other end of it. And now you got to assume the majority of children, and certainly teenagers and older, are spending most of their day talking to strangers and getting the content from them. And look, we're seeing this everywhere. This is at the heart of what's wrong with our political system in the country today. It's what's causing, and it's what enables the vortex of ideas, some good, many bad, to dominate and program and control people's lives. So this is the scary stuff. But again, the good side of it, and I think the reality of it, whether we like it or not, is that like with this move to this digital frontier comes an opportunity for people to do new things and build new things. I think it's going to be a source of tremendous wealth for people in a way that many never previously imagined. I think it's going to be like so many other technologies. It's going to be a solution for a lot of the stuff that we think are problems today. Some of the things that seem like the obvious problems are not really going to be problems, and some of the things that maybe don't seem as obvious, like some of the brainwashing or impact on people's thought or exposure to ideas that may not be healthy for us as a society or individually, that's going to be other stuff that we need to address and figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, look, we started kind of philosophically and getting into kind of the meta issues, but so to speak. But I think that's really important because I don't think there's enough of that kind of a discussion out there. But here's my view of it. It kind of is what it is. This is where we are. Yeah. People are in these worlds. It's like you said, we're only going to go deeper and deeper into those immersive worlds. I guess one of the things I think about a lot is that we are, our kids, well, all of us see these lives that we want to live, or that they think are, you know, are aspirational to them, to look this way or to live that way or to have that kind of an exciting life. And in an immersive environment, you have an ability to enter into a land or a world that you want, and you define yourself. You define what you look like, you define what you do, you define your actions and your environment. And so as the world around you is maybe not as idyllic as you would like it to be, the
Yeah.
motivation is to spend increasing time into that fully immersive world that's this fantasy world, but that becomes your reality, right? That's your reality. And so I think it's inevitable that that's going to happen more and more and more. But at the end of the day, my knee-jerk reaction is, how can that be good? But at the end of the day, if our brains are thinking like are happy or blissful, does it matter? Like,
Yeah.
and I want to think that the humanity in the you know, like the physical realm, um, is something that we absolutely need to continue to ground ourselves in. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be able to keep a species going unless you have some physical interaction. But it's as we look at the generations that are going to come after us, it's a pretty daunting thing, unless it isn't, unless it is just part of evolution, and we're
Yeah.
going to go. So, you know, these are the kinds of
Yeah.
things that I love talking about, and curious to get your thoughts about that. Just like, does it matter at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah. So did I just lose power? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I got you.
So I mean, we talked about some of the scary things. Ultimately, I actually believe that that there's incredibly great things that are going to come out of this, and especially you know, inside of these immersive worlds, and the amount of problem solving and the amount of like creativity and the amount of opportunity. I mean, there are far more benefits to this than drawbacks. We just need to be conscious of what the challenges are, and what the risks are, I think, and remember that we still have a role to play in as a society, to make sure that we do impose some restrictions and attempt anyway to you know, to keep the train on the tracks to some extent. But I think overall, I mean, everything that I see, you know, in terms of the amount of like intellectual development and story sense and entrepreneurship and that type of, those are all really good things. And I think generally speaking, I think gaming in particular, and then by extension more time in these digital worlds, I think it can be harnessed for mostly good things. And I also think there's like the practical realities and limitations of the physical world where you know, especially in places where you know, we spend a lot of time talking about you know, blockchain gaming and the opportunity for people in developing countries to earn a minimum wage and those types of things. But actually, I think that the even more interesting thing about immersive worlds is in all these places where the middle class is actually rising too, and they're going to be able to have experiences that they might not otherwise get to have. And I think that's equally important to what's going on, and frankly, I think far more likely to matter over time. I think the immersive worlds that are available and becoming available to people, and you mentioned like people who can be somebody different in a digital world, and they can change their look and they can have their avatars and they can do all of that, but they can also just be a little funnier and be a little more comfortable and a little more confident and have an opportunity to you know, to meet people and engage with people that they might not otherwise have gotten to spend time with. And I mean, all these things are are mostly what's happening in these environments and what people are doing and why they're great. And then we just need to be conscious of the stuff that can happen out on the edges if we're not careful.
I'm going to go through a lightning round with you about a bunch of different
Sure.
projects and a couple different concepts, but I do want to ask you about one thing that I've never really understood. You know, the world of games and esports is very male dominated, right? Very male
Right.
dominated. And so and the whole area of Web3 is very male dominated too. And so what can be done to broaden the scope and bring, you know, so it's not such a bro culture into things?
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that like just to build out the opportunities and to maximize the positive utility that comes from this, it has to be more inclusive and bring people in. And I don't see that happening yet in some, large extent.
Yeah, I mean, I there's a lot of emphasis on attempting to, there's Girls Who Code and there's organizations like that. And I think, though, you're right, it's been very male dominated and the gaming culture has been male dominated. I think it's going to even out over time, just because I think the younger generation, just period, that I see it now. And there are Jasper, my 14-year-old, and some of his friends and younger than that, the women there are gaming. And so, to some extent, it's probably naive to say it'll happen naturally. But I think at some level it actually will, just because, it takes a little bit of time, but as the nature of games have evolved, because I think that was the other thing that happened, right? You had sort of going back 20, 25 years, 30 years, and you had all these hardcore games, and that was really dominated by men. And then you had, with mobile games, that was an expansion, largely into a whole new demo of a gamer, right? And that's consistently what's happened with games, and why it's such a fascinating, part of the evolution of media, where you have, unlike all these other forms of media and developments in media that kind of cannibalize the what came before. I think with games, what we've consistently seen is just a growth in the number of gamers around the world, right? And so you have now 3 billion plus gamers in the world. And one way to think about this is if you believe, like I do, everybody's going to be a gamer. Just because at this point it's like, what is a game in the first place? If everybody's going to be a gamer, then that means all of the women are going to be gamers too.
Well, that's part of the, the evolution that you were talking about. Everybody's spending more and more time in these immersive worlds. And so inevitably, if you're going to be interacting in society, you're going to be spending time in these immersive worlds.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, and that is happening more and more. And again, it's like, part of that is like, when you change what we mean, when you move from games to immersive worlds, or you start thinking about activities inside of immersive worlds that are not games as traditionally defined, then they're going to have a much more even split of men and women, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to get into a couple of specific questions that I have, and some projects that I think are interesting, and then I want you to identify some of the things that are most interesting to you, some of the trends or along those lines. So first, NFTs versus DAOs. Help me understand, like, I think I got it. But for those out there who are listening, non-fungible tokens versus decentralized autonomous organizations, and how they intersect and how they're fundamentally different from each other, or not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, non-fungible tokens are really a DAO is a way for people to organize themselves, and many of those DAOs are, you may express your ownership in the DAO by owning a token, for example. But for the most part, when I think of DAOs and non-fungible tokens, I think of DAOs as an organization, a group of people that come together in a decentralized way. And a lot of what they're doing these days, you see them, like, a lot of those DAOs are out there buying NFTs. And they're organizing themselves by way of a DAO in order to capitalize their purchases and build a collection of NFTs. The NFTs themselves are either the collectible art in many cases, or they are the profile pics that people are using for their avatars and using to represent their membership in a particular community, right? And so you can be in like an NFT community, like like the Bored Apes or something like that, which is a popular one now. And you're in that community by virtue of owning a Bored Ape NFT. That is not necessarily a DAO, and then there are some projects that are organized as DAOs, and membership in the DAO comes with an underlying NFT. But I mean, there's lots of different ways to think about that relationship, but I think the most important one there is just like, a DAO is an evolution of an organization, right? And so it's sort of like a Web3 sort of native decentralized approach to governance and to bringing people together around a common goal.
So let's talk about a common goal for a DAO that, there was the recent opportunity to buy or potentially buy a copy of the Constitution. That's one of the, the most public things that are out there. But then there's the opportunity of, if people band together, and I'm deep on the music side, beating out some of the big private equity guys to buy a music catalog as an example. So like Dylan's, I think he sold for about $400 million just on some of the copyrights and the compositions, and then just recently had a deal on the masters. And that's big private equity money. But there's no reason why a DAO can't organize and pool their resources together to acquire intellectual property like that, right? That's one, or buying a
there's a DAO. There's a DAO. There's Link's DAO that's out there buying a golf course. There's a DAO. If you can think of it right now, there's probably a DAO that's been organized or launched to try to do it. There's a bunch of different art collecting DAOs. You mentioned Constitution DAO. There's all kinds of interesting things. And again, I mean, I think the question though, and I think we're going to start to see, by the way, a lot more, action around not-for-profit and social impact type of goals. And I think, DAOs are very good at the moment at rallying people around a cause and bringing them together. And it's primarily the crypto community that has, a lot of those people have generated a lot of wealth and actually are a very impact-oriented group of people, and they want to go do things and exert themselves and their ideas into the world and change things for and impact the world in their in the way that they believe it should be changed. So you're seeing a lot of that.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about that. So if you have a DAO organizational structure to do social impact, like to make some contribution to a cause of some kind, let's say pooling resources together, why could that not be done just the old-fashioned way of pooling resources together outside of a DAO structure? But what is the benefit of doing it via a DAO instead of?
I mean, honestly, I think that's still very much an open question. I think a lot of the people like that are defaulting today into saying we should do a DAO, like there's still so much to learn about what you can and can't do with a DAO, and what the limitations of the DAO are, and what the regulatory restrictions are going to be. There's a lot of stuff going on that is still somewhat in the gray area, and there's a lot of questions around. Look, we're back to sort of political theory here, but look at recent examples of referendum governance, and and ask yourself, like we can talk about Brexit, we could talk like one person, one vote referendum. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to organize yourself. It doesn't mean that there's lots of things that you may want to do in the world that are better suited or better accomplished by a smaller group of people making decisions in a more centralized, more top-down way. Just because you decentralize it and you give everybody a share or and an opportunity to voice in on how things are going to be done does not mean that is the better way to do it. And so we need to see. In some instances it can be. In a lot of instances it just creates a whole lot of hassle and mess. I've had a bunch of friends in different organizations that I'm involved with very recently, in fact, where people are conflating the idea of fundraising around a common cause with being a DAO and decentralizing the governance. And those are two different things. And you have to try to figure out, like, do we want to do this thing? Do we need to be decentralized and be a decentralized autonomous organization in order to get the fundraising done? If not, are we structuring ourselves that way for some other reason? What's the benefit of doing that, and what are the risks? Just like any other organization you would start.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most obvious reason to organize as a DAO is to pool resources together to achieve some result that you couldn't be done otherwise, right? So you have a hand in buying a sports team or doing something like that. Do you anticipate that? Let's say my beloved Minnesota Vikings. So we don't like what's going on because we've never won a Super Bowl and you just can't do it. So we have all these disgruntled Minnesota Vikings fans from around the planet who come together and pool our resources together to buy out the team. Do you see that kind of thing as being a real deal that's going to be happening?
Yes.
Okay.
That particular example, although not with Minnesota Vikings, but I can tell you that sooner than you think, and possibly with our involvement, you'll see the idea of a sort of acquisition, tokenized acquisition of sports teams. I think it's a kind of a no-brainer move, because I mean, all of this stuff is about community. And so if like,
absolutely,
you can see these examples of projects. My sister's involved with one that's been great, called Warps, which was a PFP project, and with some really amazing AI music tech, and like super cool project. And they've created a really hyper engaged community and had a successful launch a couple of weeks ago. And I'm a major believer in this project. But she was the sort of community manager on it, and she built this project and built this community from scratch over the last, with the partners over there over the last couple of years. And like, that's amazing. And it's incredible when you see that happen. And when these communities come together and do what they do, it's remarkable. And again, the 800-pound gorilla, excuse the pun, but like the Bored Apes or the CryptoPunks, or these communities are unbelievable in their fervor and in their commitment to the idea and the commonality of the vision and the art, or whatever it may be.
And building the economy around it.
And building the economy.
Yeah.
But when you talk about like, okay, so all of that is true. And if so much of the value comes from the community in the first place, when you then look at sports, like what better example of something that already has like these sports teams, the major league teams, the minor league teams, all the way up and down, that like what they do is build community around a common brand, right? And like, it's such an obvious place to, and it should be. I mean, we're going to find out how it all works, and it's going to be a fun experiment as we start to see some of these teams get bought and tokenized. And I really do think it's going to happen pretty soon. But like, it should be easier, right? It's a little bit like saying, are you going to go build a movie around a totally new idea that's never been discussed before? Or are you going to go build a movie around an existing piece of IP that already has some brand awareness and loyalty and all of that? And so I think it makes sense that we start to see these things. And then when you think about sports and everything that you have there to offer, because the biggest challenge with so many of these communities and NFT communities that are being built is like, once you get past the initial sizzle, it's like, what do you have to keep people interested in coming back? And so with sports, like, you've got, you know what that is, and you've got content to give them, and that's baked into to the membership in the community from the beginning, in the form of a league and events and matches and a brand and merchandise and all the stuff that you want. So
shared incentives,
and shared vision.
Right?
Yeah.
But shared incentives. So in a situation like that, do you anticipate that those who are going to be part of that DAO that's acquiring a sports team, so it's a community, as you said, so they're going to be sharing in the value that they create as an economy too? And so there'll be members, yes, and then they will have the ability to actually, in the music case as an example, continuing share of earnings that come from the compositions, and then the opportunity to resell that limited membership to somebody else, and then take the gains from that. So
that's the idea. Yeah.
But how does
now, and again, navigating the laws around participating in the financial gains from the underlying project that the DAO or whatever the structure is that is formed to go, buy and tokenize these teams. Again, it doesn't have to be a DAO, but I think that that question then brings you back into the world of securities laws, and it's the thing that everybody's got to pay attention to. And like, it's not just obvious that a lot of these projects that are being formed in these DAOs are operating in the green zone with respect to securities laws. Some are, some probably are, and some aren't.
Well,
And that's what we got to figure out.
yeah, grand experimentation time. But how in that situation, again, that example that you're going to be getting into acquiring a team of some kind, how is decision making done within that organization if it's a DAO and it's non-hierarchical? So how does that happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you look at these, the decision making again is what really matters is that the governance is laid out and ultimately agreed upon by the community. And so you could have a DAO that also has a more representative form of government, so to speak. And so
Yeah.
so there's different ways to distribute out the ownership of the entity, but also elect certain people to be managing or acting. But again, this is where you need to be careful, because if as you probably know with securities laws, like if you get into a situation where you're benefiting financially from the work of other people, you start to run into some of those questions of like, well, what was this interest that was sold to you? Now DAOs, in theory, they're getting around it because there is no central actor that sold anything to you in the first place. The whole thing has been decentralized, but this is part of the big question.
Yeah, because there needs to be some, to your point, some centralization of decision making, of governance of some kind to be able to, so yeah.
And then when that happens, then right, and do those become then the people that are deemed to be the agents working on behalf of the enterprise, adding value to the enterprise, and then you're into security. So it's tricky. There's a lot of stuff to figure out.
And you're the guy who's making that all happen. So yeah, I can't even imagine I can't even imagine how the mind ever rests, right? You're working on all these things all the time.
It's a really intellectually exciting time, but it's I see your guitars in the background. I was joking when I jumped on that's been like my pandemic obsession and my way to relax through the whole thing. And that's pretty much for me the best thing about turning off all the devices and just going and playing guitar, is that it is an opportunity to just not be hearing the buzz of notifications and Discord and everything else that
totally.
This world lives in. So.
Yeah, I just got back from Mammoth, skiing for several days. It was so great to clear the head and be out in nature. But you mentioned the guitars. One of the areas, sports teams, absolutely. That's a natural community. There's fervor, there's passion, there's all of that. I think music is another area that just is ripe for the artist-fan relationship. And I love the idea of decentralization where you have the artist who can connect directly and be supported by their fan base. The fans are just like, they want to help create, they want to fuel more creation and promote and do all the wonderful things that we'd see in the sports side too. And ultimately have the opportunity to potentially share in the upside that they help create too. And the ongoing benefits that come with it, whether it's, just now it's exclusive experiences that come with being a member of that particular NFT. You an artist, you make one available. There's lots of really exciting things happening in the music space, I think. And I'm a huge believer, despite a lot of the issues that people have flagged. And there's a lot of, buyer beware right now on the NFT side. But ultimately, the promise of direct connection, I think, is really exciting. Today is an interesting day because Coachella, one of the great experiences on the music side, just today launched their 10 NFTs that they've made available to the marketplace. And I'm curious what you think of that, like packaging an experience, a lifetime experience, essentially. And like that to me seems like a natural, wonderful thing. At the same time, those experiences, I guess it's not unlike any super VIP experiences from the beginnings of time, are only going to be available to the mega wealthy who can afford those NFTs.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to get your thoughts about that. Like, because Web3 is all about, the concept is democratization, decentralization.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, a lot of these opportunities are really only available to those, like entry fees are so steep. So how do you square that?
I haven't looked at that project, but I actually think that that over time, and maybe it'll be successful. And I think, look, there have always been those super VIP experiences that people can buy, and I guess in the NFT world that shouldn't be any different. And again, the problem is a lot of these projects that are bigger communities that are really not supposed to be about VIP, like Uber VIP experiences. They're supposed to be more about experiences that are available to the broad community, as a whole. I think there the challenge is you get into people that are just really participating for the price action and speculating on, and once the tokens stop going up, does anybody stick around anymore? And what happens to all the people that are left holding the bag? So I think, Coachella one aside, I really have no comment because I haven't looked at it. I actually think what's interesting about NFTs though, and we call them NFTs now, but like way before anybody was talking about them as NFTs, I have this portfolio company, Vatum. Eric Poulier founded, who's out, you may know him, LA guy, amazing entrepreneur. And 5-6 years ago, he was talking about smart networked digital objects, which we were all kind of amazed that NFT as the name for this thing took off and actually caught on at all, because it always seemed to me like it sounded like some weird disease or something like that, and there was no way anybody was going to actually, like, it's a marketer's nightmare. But it stuck. But smart networked digital objects, if you actually call them what they are, and I think that's frankly more interesting to me than non-fungible token. It tells you a lot more about why these things are interesting. And I don't believe that that in the relatively near future, the interesting thing about NFTs or smart network digital objects is going to be these very limited edition, very, very expensive. I mean, you'll have some of that. You'll have it in the fine arts world, and particularly in the sort of generative art world, which we talk a lot about in other places, and are big investors and believers in the evolution of art and the medium of generative art. But the majority, 99.9% of the NFTs in the world in the near future, I think, are going to be free. I think they're going to be free, and I think they're going to be the most powerful tool that brands have ever had to reach their audience and reach their consumers and communicate with them in an always-on, 24/7 way. You think about what it means if Coca-Cola creates a smart network digital Coca-Cola object, right? And Coca-Cola NFT, and you, Peter, have that in your wallet. And as long as you have that in your wallet, what Coca-Cola has is an always-on opportunity to talk to you in the form of an object that can be geotagged, can change state, can do all of these things that Coca-Cola has never been able to reach its consumers in that way and connect with them and stay. And you, the consumer, are going to have the ability to opt out of that relationship with Coke anytime you want by just deleting it from your wallet, giving it away, getting rid of it. And so the brands are going to want to give these things away because they're going to want to minimize the friction between you and picking up their object. And once they have that relationship with you, then they can talk to you and they can communicate with you. And it's going to be in a far less toxic way than a lot of advertising has evolved to be. I think this is a major disruption of advertising that's on the horizon here. I think that, when brands and the marketer, primarily this is going to be from the CMO side of the C-suite. This is going to be the marketers who are saying, well, I've got this budget already to try to build brand awareness and reach my audience and give them things of value. Well, I can give them the ultimate thing of value. I can literally, connect with them, give them something that represents who we are, and stay connected to them and maintain an ongoing relationship with them. So I think that's just by sheer the scale of that idea is so massive that it will vastly overpower the tiny part of the NFT world that's about expensive, super high priced status collectibles like that you have to buy. I think it's going to be much more about the ultimate CRM or the ultimate brand, marketing tool for brands to talk to their consumers.
So I would imagine that's a central focus, or one of the focuses of what you are looking at with the firm.
Huge focus. Yeah.
But so you have this completely democratized where it's essentially free. The brand has the direct connection. the connected person, myself, you get benefits that are defined by the brand, and they're obviously sufficiently valuable to me that I keep that connection going. So you have that where it's completely democratized. And then you have the super VIP or fan club sort of model, which can be a sports team. But it can be much more limited than that too. I don't want to take too much of your time,
Yeah.
but I want to just ask you about like virtual real estate, like Decentraland, Sandbox, Superworld. Are these, if you are buying into, let's say, Decentraland, how does Decentraland maintain its exclusivity? I guess you could say the same thing about any piece of art or anything like that. It's just perception, ultimately, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, in the case of Sandbox, for example, which is actually structuring itself as a DAO. I mean, you have a community that in theory could vote to expand the land and the real estate that's there, but they would have to vote to do that and decide. And otherwise, you have an on-chain scarce resource, and people are going. The bet is that, again, if people are spending more and more of their time inside of these virtual worlds, it's virtual Disney World or anything like that, where there's going to be a tremendous amount of value by aggregating people into a digital place and being able to show them things and market to them and entertain them and reach them there in that environment. But again, you're going to be in those environments. You're going to be able to do things that you were never able to do in the physical world. And again, I don't think this is just about everybody in the digital world and there is no more, physical world either. I think what's interesting about immersive worlds like Sandbox, for example, and why brands are going to be in there is I think that they will, especially for the foreseeable future, they will build experiences in the digital world. I think those digital world experiences will increasingly be able to connect back to things that are happening in the physical world.
Totally
You're going to be
agree.
able to take, you're going to take objects in and out. And again, these smart network digital objects, like these are all the ways why it's just going to be so much more valuable to Coca-Cola for Peter to have a digital Coke in his wallet versus a physical Coke in his pocket. And you're going to be able to take that Coke into the digital world, and it's going to be able to do different things depending on where you are. And you're going to be able to interact with it in the physical world and trade it in or buy, for a real Coke if that's what you want to do, or any number of other things that you can imagine, craft with it. And this is where all the gaming and everything comes in. It's like you start thinking about people walking around with all these digital objects, and what do we do in MMOs? What do we do in video games? We take objects, we collect objects. There, think about playing if you play any of these games, or I'm like playing Breath of the Wild again right now obsessively, and it's like I'm walking around crafting and I've got my whole inventory of stuff, and I'm just thinking to myself, man, this is like we're all just going to be doing this with our NFTs before too long anyway.
Well, that gets into, so when I was trying to wrap my head around like digital art and buying into the high priced art via an NFT or something along those lines, that kind of the aha moment to me was, as you spend more and more of your time in the digital world and less in the physical world, well, your persona is that person who's in the digital world. And so you will be, I forgot who was talking about it, but you won't be driving as much. You won't be like doing this, that. And for those who are status conscious, okay, one way to reflect that is by having your digital art in your metaverse and in your virtual world. And that's, so like when you think about the value of a digital piece of art, although I think the knee-jerk reaction for many is that, or most, is that I don't get it. Well, as you start thinking along the lines of what you've been talking about, where you're spending more and more of your time in this immersive world, well, then it makes sense that that's going to, the way you present yourself, the things that you collect in that world are going to be of more value to you, and the market will rise accordingly, right? I mean, that's kind of the way that things are evolving.
That's the bet.
I mean,
yeah.
that is the big bet. God, man, there's so many different ways that so many different directions I could go on this.
But we got to continue this in person now that we're moving around in the world again. I'll be getting back out to LA a lot more often for sure.
Yeah, no, it's great to see you. It's great to see you. And like I said, what you guys are doing over there, you're on the bleeding edge of it all. I guess, are there any specific I don't know if trends is the right word, but something that's a little bit under the radar in the world of Web3 and what you're looking at that you think is really exciting? You mentioned one of it where brands, how they interact with one another or how they're going to be interacting with us. And so it's going to be much more democratized. But anything else that's perhaps not obvious to people?
I mean, I don't want to tell you all my secrets
Oh,
necessarily.
a few.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the big ideas for sure. I mean, we're actually with the next fund in particular, we're going to be focused a lot more on that infrastructure bucket. I think we're actually realizing that now is an amazing time to get back into software, obviously, but even hardware in a little more aggressive way. And I was never like I've made a few hardware bets in my life over the last 10 years, but I think this is really a time to dig back into that. I think I'm getting very bullish on VR again. And you know, there have been a lot of ups and downs with VR and a lot of false starts, but I think we're really starting to hit that world where you know, it's pretty interesting for the first time, a VR headset outsold one of the major game consoles this past year. You know, Oculus sold over 8 million units and Xbox just about 8 million. So I mean, it's like we're actually maybe at a pretty powerful inflection point, and so I'm really excited about VR. You know,
So are you? Let me ask you a question about that. So are you bullish on Meta/Facebook?
Let me put it this way. I love that for the foreseeable future, Mark Zuckerberg is going to talk about the metaverse on every earnings call and tell the world about how important these ideas are. Do I think that Meta and Facebook's product is going to be the big winner in the immersive world realm? I mean, no, I don't. It's hard to bet against Facebook, and it's, you know, and 3 billion people, and they don't have to convert a lot of them in order to be the biggest today, and that'll be true for a while forward. But you know, ultimately, I think that there are going to be far more interesting, you know, worlds built in places that people want to spend their time in.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that.
Yeah.
All right, Sam. Listen. It's a
Peter,
Friday afternoon.
Great to see you, man.
I'm going to let you go, but yeah, great to see you too. And yes, we'll definitely get together in the real world, hopefully soon. Okay. It's been too long.
Let's do it soon. Yeah,
all right, man.
Absolutely. Great to see you. Really appreciate having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, man.